Sarah Chen had spent enough time around quantum drives to know when one was about to fail. The distinctive high-pitched whine cutting through Outpost 47's maintenance bay wasn't just another harmless fluctuation. It was a death knell. Station I, begin emergency shutdown sequence for Drive Core Alpha, she commanded, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. The computer's response was immediate and concerning. Unable to comply. Drive core protocols have been locked out. Current containment status. Critical. Sarah swore under her breath, the kind of creative profanity she learned from spending too much time with Centaurian merchants. The quantum drive shouldn't have been locked out, couldn't have been locked out, unless someone had deliberately bypassed multiple failsafes. The maintenance bay's warning lights cast everything in a pulsing red glow as she sprinted toward the manual override panel. That's when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong in any properly functioning space station. The screech of tearing metal, followed by heavy footfalls that made the deck plates shudder. She spun around, expecting to find a hull breach or a catastrophic structural failure. Instead, she found herself face to face with a drachnid. The alien warrior was massive, easily 3 meters tall, with iridescent scales that shifted between deep purple and midnight blue. One arm clutched at a wound in its side, where some kind of energy weapon had left a nasty burn. The drachnid's other hand held what looked like a ceremonial blade, though Sarah suspected it was far more functional than decorative. Human. The drachnid's voice rumbled like distant thunder. This station harbors traitors. Sarah's mind raced. Drachnids were proud warriors, allies of humanity in theory, but notorious for their rigid honor codes and tendency to solve problems with plasma fire. Having one show up wounded, talking about traitors, while her quantum drive was about to go critical. This wasn't coincidence. "Look," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I've got a quantum drive about to bridge containment. Unless you want this entire sector of space turned into a very pretty light show, we need to deal with that first." The drachnid's head tilted, compound eyes studying her with alien intensity. "You are the drive specialist." "Sarah Chen." "Yes. And you are?" "Kithax, warrior caste, House of the Eternal Storm." The drachnid straightened despite its wound. "The drive's malfunction is no accident. The traitors I pursue sabotaged it." Sarah's suspicions crystallized into certainty. They locked out the shutdown protocols. But why? The station's AI cut her off. Warning: quantum containment failure in 15 minutes. Evacuation protocols initiated. 15 minutes. Sarah ran her hands through her short black hair. That's not possible. The fail-safes should give us at least an hour. "They are accelerating the collapse," Kithax growled. "This station is meant to be destroyed, along with evidence of their crimes." Sarah's mind was already racing through possibilities. The quantum drive couldn't be shut down normally, but there might be another way. It was incredibly stupid, probably illegal, and definitely against every safety protocol in the book. "Kithax," she said, "how good are you at lifting heavy things?" The drachnid warrior's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "I am not some common laborer." "No, you're a warrior who's about to help me save this station by breaking about 50 regulations." Sarah moved to a nearby storage locker, punching in her access code. "We're going to physically remove the containment housing and trigger an emergency quantum field collapse." Thax's wound seemed forgotten as he watched her pull out heavy insulated gloves and tools. "That is impossible." "The quantum field. We'll try to tear reality apart, yes." Sarah grabbed a plasma torch. "Unless we can redirect it through the station's structural integrity field. It's never been done before, but the theoretical models suggest it's possible." "Never been done before," Kithax repeated. "You propose to attempt an untested procedure with a quantum drive while pursued by assassins." Sarah gave him a grim smile. "Unless you've got a better idea." The drachnid warrior was silent for a moment, then let out a sound that might have been a laugh. "You humans are insane." He stepped forward, sheathing his blade. What must I lift? The next 12 minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. Sarah directed Kithax in removing crucial components, while she rerouted power and prepared for the field collapse. The Drachnid's incredible strength made short work of tasks that would have required heavy machinery, though his wound clearly pained him. They worked in surprisingly effective synchronization, the warrior following her rapid-fire instructions without hesitation. Sarah found herself grateful for the Drachnid's presence, not just for the raw strength, but for the calm focus he brought to the crisis. With 2 minutes remaining, they had the containment housing exposed. Sarah's hands were steady as she made the final connections, even as sweat dripped down her face. "The field collapse will begin in 30 seconds, she announced. "When I give the signal, pull the housing straight up. No twisting, no hesitation. If we're off by even a few degrees, we die," Kithax finished. "A warrior's death, at least. I'd prefer no death at all." Sarah's fingers flew across the emergency controls. "Ready?" The Drachnid's massive hands gripped the housing. "Ready. 3, 2, 1. Now." Kithax heaved upward as Sarah triggered the collapse. Reality itself seemed to protest, a high-pitched whine building to frequencies that made her teeth ache. Warning lights flashed as the station's structural integrity field strained to contain the cascade. For one terrible moment, Sarah thought she'd miscalculated. Then the quantum field collapsed with a sound like a thunderclap, and blessed silence fell over the maintenance bay. Sarah sagged against a console, exhausted but alive. Fax carefully set down the housing, his scales glittering in the now-normal lighting. "You did it," the Drachnid said, something like respect in his alien voice. "We did it," Sarah corrected. "Now want to tell me about these traitors we just stopped from blowing up my station." Kithax's wound had reopened during their efforts, but he stood straight as he faced her. "What I must tell you involves both our species, human. There are those who would see the alliance between our peoples fail, who work from shadows to spark war." Sarah looked at the quantum drive, now safely powered down. "And they chose my station because it houses something they seek, something that could change the balance of power in this sector." Fax's eyes fixed on her. "I require your help to stop them. Drive specialist Sarah Chen. Will you aid me?" Sarah thought about her quiet life on the station, about regulations and protocols and safety margins. Then she thought about the kind of people who would murder an entire station's crew just to cover their tracks. "Well," she said, reaching for her tool belt, "I've already broken 50 regulations today. What's a few more?" The station's security office was as close to a fortress as you could get in space, but Sarah Chen had spent 3 years maintaining its systems. She knew its weaknesses better than anyone. Now, crouched in a maintenance tunnel with a wounded Drachnid warrior, she was about to exploit every single one of them. "The security grid updates every 42 seconds, she whispered, watching patterns of light dance across her tablet. "It's a quirk in the quantum encryption. They never fixed it because nobody was supposed to know about it." Kithax shifted behind her, his massive frame barely fitting in the cramped space. "And you know of it because I'm the one who found it and filed 3 reports about it." Sarah's fingers moved across the tablet's surface, reports that apparently got lost in bureaucratic limbo. Funny how that works. The Drachnid warrior's wound had been hastily treated with a medical synthesizer, but Sarah could tell he was still in pain. Nevertheless, his voice remained steady. "You believe the traitors have infiltrated station security?" "I believe," Sarah said, "that someone went to an awful lot of trouble to sabotage a quantum drive when there are much easier ways to destroy a station. They wanted something specific destroyed, or hidden in the chaos." The tablet chimed softly. Sarah watched another security cycle complete, counting under her breath. Now, they moved with practiced coordination despite having only worked together for a few hours. Kithax's strength made quick work of the maintenance panel, while Sarah bypassed the internal sensors. Within moments, they were inside the security office's auxiliary storage. "The evidence you seek," Kithax rumbled quietly. "What form does it take?" Sarah pulled up the station's inventory on a nearby terminal. Not sure, but I bet it'll be something that doesn't belong in standard security logs. Something that. She stopped, frowning at the screen. Well, that's interesting. What have you found? A power draw that shouldn't exist. There's a hidden system pulling energy from the station's grid, but it's being masked as environmental control feedback. Sarah's fingers flew across the keys. Someone's gone to a lot of trouble to hide whatever this is. Kfax moved closer, studying the display. Can you locate the source? Better than that. Sarah smiled grimly. I can shut down the masking protocol. Let's see what they're so desperate to hide. The terminal beeped in protest as she bypassed security measures, but Sarah had learned long ago that most systems had backdoors if you knew where to look. The screen flickered, then displayed a new set of readings. By the eternal storm, Kfax breathed. Those energy signatures. You recognize them. They are similar to weapons my people developed during the Nexus Wars. Weapons that were supposed to have been destroyed. Sarah's blood ran cold. The Nexus Wars were ancient history, but every engineering student learned about them. A conflict that had nearly torn the galaxy apart through the use of reality-warping weapons. Someone's been rebuilding them. No. Kfax's voice was grim. Someone has been improving them. A sudden noise from the corridor made them both freeze. Footsteps, multiple sets, approaching with military precision. Sarah quickly killed the terminal display, but she knew they had seconds at most before discovery. Options, she whispered. Kfax's hand went to his blade. We fight. Against an unknown number of armed opponents in an enclosed space. Pass. Sarah's eyes darted around the room, landing on a maintenance shaft. I've got a better idea. How do you feel about garbage chutes? The Drachnid warrior stared at her. You cannot be serious. Completely serious. These chutes connect to the station's recycling system. We can use them to reach the lower levels without being seen. She was already moving to the access panel. Unless you prefer to explain to heavily armed conspirators why we're here. Kfax made a sound that might have been a sigh. The honor songs of my house will never speak of this day. The footsteps were right outside now. Sarah got the panel open just as the storage room's door began to cycle. Less complaining, more sliding. They'd barely made it into the chute before the door opened. Sarah heard confused voices above as she and Kfax navigated the narrow passage, trying to control their descent without making too much noise. The Drachnid warrior's bulk made the journey particularly challenging, but somehow they managed. They emerged 10 minutes later in a lower maintenance level, covered in substances Sarah chose not to think too hard about. Kfax looked like he was seriously reconsidering his life choices. That, he announced, was not a warrior's path. No, Sarah agreed, checking her tablet. It was an engineer's path. And it got us where we needed to go. She oriented herself, then pointed down a dimly lit corridor. The power signatures are coming from somewhere in this section. Whatever they're hiding, it's close. Kfax cleaned his blade with deliberate motions. Then we proceed with caution. These weapons were devastating enough in their original form. If they have truly been enhanced, they could do more than destroy a station. Sarah finished. They could rip apart the fabric of space itself. She started down the corridor, her mind already working on possibilities. But why here? Why use this station? Perhaps, Kfax said as he followed her, because it was perfectly positioned. A remote station, dealing primarily with merchant traffic, yet connected to major trade routes, ideal for both concealment and distribution. Sarah nodded slowly. And if something went wrong, if someone started asking questions, the station suffers an unfortunate quantum drive malfunction. All evidence is destroyed, along with any witnesses. They moved deeper into the maintenance level, following the faint energy readings. Sarah's tablet showed increasing power fluctuations, suggesting they were getting close to whatever the conspirators were hiding. Kfax, she said quietly, if these weapons are as dangerous as you say, we can't let them leave this station. The Drachnid warrior was silent for a moment. No, he agreed. We cannot, even if we must destroy them ourselves, which would probably get us branded as traitors by both governments. Most likely. Sarah checked her tablet again, then looked up at her unlikely ally. Still with me? Cathax's mandibles clicked in what she was starting to recognize as amusement. You have already made me crawl through garbage, human. I suspect this can only improve from here. Despite the gravity of their situation, Sarah found herself smiling. Then her tablet beeped and all humor fled. Energy spike, she warned. Something's happening ahead. They rounded a corner and found themselves facing a heavy blast door. Through its reinforced viewport, they could see flashes of impossible light, colors that shouldn't exist in normal space. Well, Sarah said, pulling tools from her belt. Guess we found what they were hiding. Cathax's wounds seemed forgotten as he readied himself for whatever lay ahead. Indeed, the question now becomes, what do we do about it? Sarah studied the door's locking mechanism, already forming plans. We do what engineers and warriors do best. She looked up at him with a fierce grin. We break things until they work the way they're supposed to. The experimental weapons lab hidden in the station's lower levels was everything Sarah's engineering nightmares were made of. Reality warping devices lined the walls, their containment fields throwing off colors that human eyes were never meant to process. But it was the central chamber that made her blood run cold. That's not supposed to exist, she whispered, staring at the massive device dominating the room. That's not supposed to be possible. Cathax moved beside her, his warrior's training evident in every careful step. You recognize this technology. It's a quantum fold generator, or at least, that's what it's trying to be. Sarah's fingers flew across her tablet, taking readings. Every major species has tried to build one. They all failed because the energy requirements are astronomical, and the field calculations. She trailed off, her eyes widening. Oh no. Explain. They're not using it to create stable folds in space. They're deliberately designing it to fail. Sarah's voice was tight with horror. When this thing collapses, it won't just destroy the station. It'll create a cascade of quantum instabilities across the entire sector. Cathax's scales shifted colors, displaying what Sarah was learning to recognize as deep concern. How many systems would be affected? All of them. The barrier between real space and quantum space would break down completely. Planets, stars, entire civilizations, they'd all be pulled into a void where the laws of physics don't even exist. The Drachnid warrior's hand tightened on his blade. Then we must. A slow clap interrupted him. Sarah and Cathax spun around to find a lab's entrance blocked by a group of armed figures. At their center stood a tall, elegant woman in a pristine corporate uniform. Magnificent, isn't it? The woman's voice was cultured, almost pleasant. The ultimate equalizer. When it activates, all the carefully maintained borders between species will vanish. All the political maneuvering, all the delicate alliances, meaningless. You're insane, Sarah said flatly. You'll kill billions. I'll free billions. The woman's smile never wavered. From the tyranny of order, from the chains of predictable reality. Imagine a galaxy where anything is possible, where the very laws of nature are subject to will and chance. Cathax stepped forward, his massive frame radiating menace. You speak of chaos and call it freedom. I speak of evolution. The woman gestured, and her guards raised their weapons. Unfortunately, you won't be alive to see it. Though I must admit, you've both proven remarkably resourceful. A human engineer and a Drachnid warrior working together. It would be poetic if it weren't so inconvenient. Sarah's mind raced. The guards had them outnumbered and outgunned, but they'd missed something crucial, something that years of handling temperamental quantum drives had taught her to notice. You know what's really inconvenient? She asked, slowly reaching for her tool belt. Building a quantum fold generator without accounting for harmonic resonance. The woman's smile faltered slightly. What? Sarah pulled out her plasma torch and fired it at the nearest piece of equipment, not at the guards, but at a specific point where several power conduits met. The effect was instantaneous. Reality screamed as competing quantum fields collided, throwing off waves of destructive interference. "Run," she shouted to Cathax, already diving behind a console as chaos erupted. The guards' weapons discharged wildly, their targeting systems confused by the quantum distortion. Cathax moved with incredible speed, his blade finding gaps in their formation as Sarah scrambled to reach the main controls. The generator starting its activation sequence. She called out, reading the emergency warnings flashing across screens. They must have triggered it when they came in. "Can you stop it?" Cathax's voice was strained as he fought off two guards at once. "Not from here. The controls are locked out." Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, trying to find a weakness in the security protocols. "But I might be able to." A shot from one of the guards caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around. Pain flared, but she forced herself to focus. The woman in corporate dress was already moving toward a secondary exit, speaking urgently into a communicator. "Cathax," Sarah shouted. "We can't let her escape. She'll have a remote trigger." The Drachnid warrior acknowledged with a roar, throwing one guard into another with bone-crushing force. But more were pouring in through the main entrance, and the quantum distortions were growing stronger. Sarah made a decision. "Cover me." She sprinted across the lab, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, heading not for the controls but for a maintenance panel she'd spotted earlier. Fax moved to protect her flank, his blade becoming a blur of motion that kept the guards at bay. "Whatever you're planning," he growled, "do it quickly." Sarah ripped open the panel, exposing the station's primary power conduits. "Remember how I said the energy requirements for this thing were astronomical?" She began cross-wiring connections with desperate speed. "That means they had to tap directly into the station's power grid. And if I can overload it at exactly the right moment, you'll destroy the generator, along with half the station," she admitted. "But it's better than losing the whole sector." A guard got past Cathax's defense, but the Drachnid warrior caught them with his tail, sending them flying. "The woman is escaping. Let her." Sarah's hands were steady despite the chaos around them. "She can't trigger the device if we blow its power supply." She made the final connection, then looked up at her ally. "But we're going to have about 30 seconds to get out of here before this whole level goes up." Cathax's compound eyes met hers. "Then we should run very fast." Sarah slammed the activation sequence home, and alarms immediately began blaring throughout the facility. She could hear the quantum fold generator's pitch changing, rising to frequencies that made her teeth hurt. "Time to go." She grabbed Cathax's arm, pulling him toward the exit she'd spotted earlier. "Unless you want to see what happens when you mix an overloaded power grid with quantum instabilities." They ran through corridors that were already beginning to warp and twist as reality broke down around them. Behind them, the generator's whine reached impossible frequencies. Sarah's shoulder burned with every step, but she forced herself to keep moving. Almost there, she gasped as they reached a maintenance lift. "If we can just..." The explosion caught them from behind, a wave of pure force carrying them into the lift. Thax's massive body shielded her from the worst of it as emergency bulkheads slammed shut, cutting them off from the destruction. For a long moment, they lay there in the darkness, breathing heavily. Then Thax spoke. "Your solution," he said, "was to blow it up." "Technically," Sarah wheezed, "my solution was to cause a catastrophic power failure that resulted in an explosion. There's a difference." The Drachnid warrior made a sound that might have been laughter. "You are either brilliant or insane. Why not both?" Sarah tried to sit up, wincing at her injuries. "But we're not done. That woman's still out there, and something tells me she has a backup plan." Thax helped her to her feet, his own wounds seemingly forgotten in the heat of battle. "Then we hunt her, together." Sarah nodded, already pulling up station schematics on her tablet. "Together. But first, I need to patch up the shoulder. And maybe grab some bigger explosives. You know, just in case. Just in case, Cathax agreed solemnly, though she could have sworn his mandibles were twitching with amusement. Lead on, my insane human friend. Lead on. The station's hangar bay was in chaos. Emergency protocols had kicked in after the explosion in the lower levels, and evacuation alarms blared as civilians rushed to board escape pods. Sarah and Cathax moved through the crowd with purpose, her tablet tracking energy signatures that shouldn't exist. There, Sarah pointed toward a sleek corporate transport near the far wall. That ship's drawing way too much power for its size. They're hiding something on board. Cathax's scales rippled with anticipation. The woman in white, along with whatever backup plan she mentioned. Sarah checked her makeshift bandage, the pain in her shoulder a constant reminder of their earlier fight. We need to get on that ship before. The transport's engines suddenly flared to life, its landing gear beginning to retract. That happens. Sarah finished. Run. They sprinted across the hangar bay, dodging panicked civilians and maintenance droids. The transport was already lifting off, its thrusters creating waves of superheated air that made Sarah's eyes water. We'll never reach it in time, Cathax growled. Sarah's eyes locked onto a maintenance crane nearby. Want to bet? Without waiting for a response, she ran to the crane's controls. Her fingers flew across the panel, overriding safety protocols and extending the mechanical arm toward the rising ship. When I say jump, jump, Cathax looked at her like she'd lost her mind. You cannot be serious. Always so negative. The crane swung into position. Jump. They leaped together, Sarah's timing proving perfect as the crane's arm swept them up and toward the transport. They crashed onto its hull just as it was about to clear the hangar bay's atmospheric barrier. Now what? Cathax demanded, his claws digging into the hull for purchase. Sarah pulled a cutting torch from her belt. Now we make our own door. The torch's plasma beam cut through the hull plating like it was paper, creating a rough circle barely large enough for Cathax to squeeze through. They dropped into what appeared to be a cargo hold, filled with crates bearing corporate logos. More weapons? The Drachnid warrior asked. Sarah checked her readings. Worse. These are quantum stabilizers, high-end ones. They're planning something big, something that would need. She trailed off, her eyes widening. We need to get to the bridge. Now. They fought their way through the ship, encountering surprisingly little resistance. Most of the security forces must have been lost in the station explosion. But when they reached the bridge, they found the corporate woman waiting for them, looking completely unruffled. I was wondering when you'd join us, she said pleasantly. Though I must admit, the crane was a surprise. Creative thinking, Engineer Chen. Sarah's good hand tightened on her torch. You know my name. Of course. We've been watching you for months. Your work with quantum drives, it is innovative, unorthodox, exactly the kind of thinking we need for the next phase. The next phase of what? Cathax demanded. The woman's smile widened. Evolution, dear warrior. You saw our prototype on the station. Impressive, wasn't it? But limited. A single sector is nothing compared to what we're about to achieve. Horror dawned as Sarah put the pieces together. The stabilizers. You're not trying to contain quantum instabilities. You're trying to direct them. Very good. Yes, with the right network of stabilizers, we can create controlled tiers in reality. Imagine it. An entire galaxy remade according to our vision. No more boundaries, no more limitations, no more sanity. Sarah cut in. The human mind isn't meant to process that kind of chaos. You'll drive entire species mad. The woman shrugged. A small price for transcendence. And you, Sarah Chen, could be part of it. Your understanding of quantum mechanics, combined with our resources, think of what we could achieve. Sarah looked at the madwoman, then at Cathax, who stood ready for battle despite his wounds. She thought about the station they'd left behind, about the billions of lives that hung in the balance. You know what? She said, I am thinking about achievement. I'm thinking about achieving this. She threw her torch at the bridge's main console, the plasma beam igniting sensitive electronics. Alarms blared as systems began to overload. The woman's composure finally cracked. "What have you done?" "Introduced a little chaos of my own." Sarah grinned. "Those quantum stabilizers you're so proud of. They don't like sudden power fluctuations. And when they fail." Kathax moved with battlefield precision, his blade finding gaps in the corporate guard's armor before they could react. "We should run again," he suggested. "Getting predictable, aren't we?" But Sarah was already moving, following the Drachnid warrior as they fought their way back through the ship. Behind them, reality itself began to tear as the stabilizers malfunctioned. The woman's screams were cut off by the sound of space-time shredding itself apart. They reached the cargo hold just as the ship's structural integrity began to fail. Through the hole they'd cut earlier, Sarah could see the station growing distant. "Please tell me you have another insane plan," Kathax rumbled. Sarah looked at the cargo bay's emergency pods, then at her tablet, which still showed the station's schematics. A crazy idea formed, the kind that would probably get them killed if she was off by even a fraction of a second. "How do you feel about surfing quantum waves?" The Drachnid warrior stared at her. "I do not know what that means, but I suspect I'm about to find out." Sarah was already programming coordinates into the escape pod's navigation system. "The ship's about to create a localized quantum rupture. If we time it right, we can ride the wave back to the station. If we time it wrong, we cease to exist in any meaningful way. See? You're getting better at this crazy human thinking." They strapped themselves into the pod just as the ship's hull began to disintegrate. Sarah's fingers danced across the controls, calculating variables that shouldn't have existed in normal space. "Ready?" she asked. Thax's mandibles clicked. "No. Launch anyway." Sarah hit the release, and they plunged into chaos. Riding a quantum wave was exactly as terrible as Sarah had imagined. Reality twisted around their escape pod, colors that shouldn't exist bleeding through the viewport as fundamental forces tried to tear them apart. The pod's hull creaked under impossible pressures as they surfed the edge of existence itself. "I can't tell if we're alive or dead," Sarah shouted over the noise of reality breaking down around them. "If we were dead," Kathax responded, his massive form somehow wedged into the human-sized restraints, "I doubt it would hurt this much." The pod's instruments were useless, quantum interference rendering them meaningless. Sarah was flying blind, using nothing but intuition and her understanding of quantum mechanics to guide them through the chaos. The corporate ship behind them had completely disappeared, consumed by the very forces his creators had sought to control. "We need an anchor," Sarah muttered, her hands dancing across controls that were rapidly becoming theoretical. "Something in normal space to lock onto, or we'll be trapped in this quantum flux forever." Thax's scales had taken on a strange iridescence in the reality-warped light. "The station. Too far. We'd never—" Sarah stopped, an idea forming. "The quantum drive. The one we shut down earlier. It's still there, still has its containment field. Can you use it?" "Maybe. If I can calculate the resonance frequency, match our quantum signature to its dormant field." She input commands faster than she could think about them, letting instinct guide her fingers. "But we'll only get one shot." The Drachnid warrior's voice was steady despite their situation. "Then make it count, Sarah Chen." She did the calculations in her head because the computers couldn't be trusted, factoring in variables that shouldn't have existed. The pod shuddered as she adjusted their course, riding waves of probability toward what she hoped was salvation. "Hold on," she warned, then triggered the emergency thrusters. The world imploded. When Sarah opened her eyes again, they were floating in normal space, the station's familiar bulk filling their viewport. The pod systems were completely fried, but they were alive, and more importantly, they were home. "We made it," she breathed. "I can't believe that actually worked." Kathax unfolded himself from the restraints with obvious relief. "You sound surprised." "Shouldn't I be?" We just surfed quantum waves using an escape pod and a broken drive core as an anchor. That's not exactly standard procedure. No, the Drachnid warrior agreed, but it is becoming remarkably standard for us. Before Sarah could respond, the pod's emergency radio crackled to life. Multiple voices were broadcasting: station security, corporate authorities, military channels from both human and Drachnid space. The quantum rupture hadn't gone unnoticed. "They'll want answers," Kithax said quietly. Sarah nodded. "About the weapons, the conspiracy, all of it." She looked at her unlikely friend. "They might not like what we tell them. Especially the part about corporate executives trying to remake reality. Then we must ensure they understand the truth." Kithax's compound eyes fixed on her. "All of it, including how a human engineer and a Drachnid warrior together prevented catastrophe. They might not believe that part either." "They will." Kithax's mandibles clicked in what she now recognized as determination. "Because we will make them believe. Our peoples have been allies on paper for too long. It is time they learn to be allies in truth." Emergency shuttles were already approaching their position as Sarah considered this. "You know," she said, "for a warrior who claims to hate bureaucracy, you're starting to sound like a diplomat. And you, for an engineer who claims to prefer machines to people, are becoming quite the revolutionary." Sarah laughed despite everything they'd been through. "Maybe we're both evolving, just not in the way that corporate psychopath intended." The pod's radio crackled again, this time with direct orders to prepare for emergency docking. Sarah took a deep breath, then looked at her companion. "Ready to change the galaxy." Kithax extended a clawed hand to help her up. "With you. Always." As they waited for the emergency teams to reach them, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. She'd started out as a simple engineer, annoyed at bureaucracy and trying to avoid excitement. Now she was half of a partnership that had not only prevented reality itself from being torn apart, but might actually help bridge the gap between their species. "Kithax," she said suddenly, "when this is all over, how do you feel about starting a consulting firm?" The Drachnid warrior tilted his head. "What kind of consulting?" "The kind where we fix problems no one else can solve. Technical issues, security concerns, reality-breaking phenomena. We seem to have a knack for it." "You propose we intentionally seek out more situations like this?" "Well, when you put it that way, it does sound a little crazy." Kithax was silent for a moment. Then his scales rippled with what she now knew was amusement. "It sounds perfectly logical to me. After all, someone must be prepared when reality needs fixing." The emergency shuttle docked with their pod, and Sarah could hear the rescue teams cutting through the damaged hatch. Soon, they would have to explain everything. The weapons, the conspiracy, their unlikely partnership. But somehow, she wasn't worried. After all, they had already surfed quantum waves and lived to tell about it. Everything else was just details. "Partners?" she asked, extending her hand. Kithax took it carefully in his massive clawed one. "Partners," he agreed. "Though I suggest we avoid garbage chutes in our future endeavors." "No promises." Sarah grinned as the hatch finally opened. "No promises at all."